we'll be going over the interactive tax assistant tool that helps taxpayers determine whether or not they can claim certain expenses as miscellaneous itemized deductions on Schedule A of their income tax return. As you may be aware, every taxpayer is able to select either the standard deduction, which is prescribed by the IRS each year, or itemized deductions, whichever is greater usually, but the taxpayer can always choose whether or not they choose one or the other. And a lot of this depends on a couple of things. First of all, like whether or not their expenses would normally exceed the standard deduction that they would otherwise be entitled to without having to do any additional work. So this tax assistant tool will help us walk through that. However, it does not address employment-related expenses other than expenses for job search, work clothes, uniforms, and union dues. So for more information on that, you would have to go to IRS Publication 529, which goes in depth about miscellaneous deductions. So the information that you'll need to walk through this tool really is simple. It's your adjusted gross income and then the type of expense or loss that you're looking into. The estimated completion time is 10 minutes. However, I do believe we'll probably walk through most of these scenarios in much less time. So let's begin. So let's go ahead and continue. As we are currently in the middle of the 2023 tax year, the most current year available to us in this tool is 2022. So let's go ahead and select that. The first question is whether or not you're itemizing deductions on Schedule A. So if you're talking about taking Schedule A deductions, then you have to be able to itemize deductions on Schedule A in order to claim them on your tax return. So let's go ahead and say no and just see what happens. So it walks through some of these expenses: business expense, legal expense, whether or not you paid restitution, or none of the above. So let's select business expense. So the tool says you must be able to itemize your deductions on Schedule A to be able to claim miscellaneous itemized deductions. So let's go back and select another option. And again, it says the same thing, except there is a mention in here about 2018. As of 2018, you're no longer able to take an itemized deduction from miscellaneous expenses subject to 2% of your adjusted gross income. So back in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, one of the provisions was that between 2018 and 2025, there was a sunset period on the ability for certain miscellaneous expenses that you could group together, and they would be subject to a 2% floor of your AGI. So if your AGI was $100,000, then your miscellaneous expenses had to add up to more than $2,000, and you could only take the difference. So if you had miscellaneous expenses of $3,000, you would subtract the $2,000 floor, and you would be able to deduct $1,000 on Schedule A. Again, that assumes that you were filing Schedule A and not taking the standard deduction. However, all of that is off the table until at least 2025. If there's no change in the tax code, then after that sunset expires, then you would be able to continue doing that. So since we've already answered, you have to be able to itemize deductions on Schedule A, let's go ahead and change this answer to yes. Now let's take a look at some of these expenses. There's only 4 different categories, so let's go through each of them in order. Business expense. So the answer says this tool cannot answer your question about business expenses. You'll have to go to IRS Publication 529, Miscellaneous Deductions, and publication 535, business expenses. And the reason why is because if you're talking about business expenses, they could be deductible, but then you also have to determine where on your tax return you would deduct them. So if you're a sole proprietor, they may be deductible on Schedule C. If you're talking about other income like rental real estate, it might be Schedule E. If you have like a S corporation or a business entity, then you may be deducting those on whatever tax form that you're filing, like a partnership return, and then that would be issued out through Schedule K1, presumably. Uh, you may you may be wondering about business expenses on behalf of an estate or a trust, in which case that would go somewhere else. So let's go back and select legal expenses. So was your legal expense related to a claim of unlawful discrimination? This tool would not be able to answer that question. You have to go to IRS Publication 529. What happens if we select no? Then it says you do not have allowable deductible miscellaneous expenses. Same verbiage that we discussed about the miscellaneous expense floor. So let's go to paying restitution. So was the expense identified as restitution for a fine or a penalty? If you say no, then you don't have any allowable expenses. If you did pay a fine or a penalty, then you may be able to, well, if the expense was identified as restitution for a fine or penalty paid to a government entity for the violation of a law, then according to this, you would have allowable miscellaneous expenses. Let's go to the final category, which is none of the above. All right, so this says you don't have any allowable expenses, but one of the things that happens is if you don't clear the cash that's in that and you keep going through too many different examples, then a lot of these questions start coming back up. So let's go through this again and see if we get a different answer. So we are itemizing deductions. Let's imagine that we paid none of the above. You don't have any allowable expenses. So according to this tool, the only allowable expenses that you may have without having to verify an IRS publication 529 would be if you paid restitution and if this was identified as a restitution for a fine or a penalty. So in that case, you would report the type and amount of your restitution expense on the other expenses line of Schedule A. So we do go into Schedule A. We do go into reporting miscellaneous itemized deductions in more depth in a couple of YouTube videos. We also have a complete article that breaks down Schedule A and everything that you need to know about it. So you can, we'll put links to those videos and the article in our show notes. If you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. If you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions or comments, as always, please post them in the comment section, and I'll do my best to answer any questions to the best of my ability. Thank you very much and have a great day.